If you pull the plug and leave the church, in 6 weeks, a committee will be formed, and in 3 months, they'll have a dozen resumes.
Right.
If you lose your family, it's, a decade, and maybe you're watching somebody else walk your baby girl down the aisle.
Yeah, that's a red. Like, we're not in the trading hours for dollars line of work. We're in a knowledge-based, skill experience-based leadership role.
Welcome back to the Practically Pastoring Podcast. My name is Frank, and I am glad that you are here. The whole gang is here. We have some awesome questions today. We're going to talk about how families handle when their kid is sick, and they still have to preach on Sunday. And we are also going to talk about how many hours does Andrew specifically work on his job and not just kind of, mess around with whatever he does on the side. But before we do that, the whole gang's here. I'm here in Florida. My name is Frank. Up in Baltimore, Maryland, we got Jeffrey Simpson.
What's up?
Down in Sumter, South Carolina, we got Delmar Pete.
I'm here. How y'all?
Next to me in the Morning After Ministry Studios, we got Andrew Larson.
Or in the Safety Harbor Community Church Worship Center.
And Timothy Miller.
Hey.
All right, guys. We have a great show. Before we do that, again, we have a great sponsor who has gifted us. Show everyone the mug that we got. That's a nice look. Oh, man, these are nice looking mugs. Hey,
is mine on the way, Andrew?
Oh, yeah.
By that, are you asking if it's packed in a box and loaded into my car? Then yes.
Sweet.
Just like it was when you left. It just hasn't been taken.
I'll pick it up on my next trip to Florida in a year.
Yeah, good thing we're having the conference again next year.
These nice campfire mugs are products of the church merch.
Merch for your church.
There you go.
Sorry, I had a mouthful of coffee.
Yeah. If you need something printed for your church, for your business, for your hobby, check out church merch.
Church merch. Merch for your church.
If you need high quality goods printed for your business, for your church, for your hobby, check out church merch. The link is in the show notes. All right, guys, let's dive into this first question from Reddit. The question is, how do your families handle when one of your kids is sick? So my husband, this is the wife is asking this question. My husband works as a youth pastor. Our kids are ages 4, 5, 3, and 1. Oh, sorry, 4.5, 3, and 1. Every time a kid is sick, I am the one staying at home because he inevitably has responsibilities on a Sunday morning or Wednesday night. The issue we've come into a lot recently is if one of the kids is sick, now all of the children are missing service. We have a kid-centered activities during all of our services, so it's not that he has to watch them while he's working, but he prefers to be early enough to service that he's there before the children's church volunteers, or they'll often have meetings before service. I hate that our children are frequently missing services if only one of them is sick, but I can't drop them off at children's church and leave one of them in the car at these ages. He takes his job seriously and wants to make sure he's always available and present, but I worry about our children as well. How do pastors manage these type of situations?
Like this is normal. Tim and I had this conversation about once a week for years because he's got 5 kids, I've got 4, and when they were younger, this was how it worked. The joke that we made constantly was, if one of them are sick, all 5, my wife and 4 kids are sick. In fact, yesterday, my wife was sick, and so none of my kids drive yet. I was out of the house before anybody else was up, so I was the only one from my family at church yesterday because that's part of the ministry family thing. And I think if the church doesn't get that, then that's a whole other issue. But for pastor parent to be available, that means that the other parent has to be unavailable. And it sucks and it's not fair, but I'm pretty sure that's kind of the way it works in the vast majority of clergy households for at least the past 100 years.
Yeah, I mean,
that's how it works in our household for sure. But what's nice is outside of a Wednesday or Sunday, usually we're flexible. So if I need to stay home on a different day, we can tag team, and that's fine. But if it's a Wednesday or a Sunday and I have primary ministry responsibilities, my wife and I have already had this conversation. We know the drill. She knows the drill. As Andrew said, if one is sick, they're all sick. They're all staying home that day or that night or whatever the case may be. But because of our jobs, we do have flexibility at other times.
Mhm.
Like Andrew, I know your wife is a teacher, so there's a Tuesday or a
Mhm.
Thursday. You're probably the one staying home with a sick kid.
Yeah, that was last week. I'm the dad that goes to the doctor's appointments and does all the things because my job is only not flexible on Sunday. So the rest of the week, it's one of the trade-offs. And I think it's really easy to look at and be like, oh, I wish we could do this like this other family. Yeah, well, if dad is an accountant or whatever else it is, you're not getting the parental trade-off that we get in ministry.
No, I think y'all just nailed it, and that's the same way it operates here. We just walked through the flu in my family, and
Gross.
yeah, or COVID. We don't know. It was bad. I still got something, but the thing is, you got to have that conversation with your spouse when services are happening that you need to be there for. You have to be there. It's just a thing, man. And so what that means is if my kid's sick on a Sunday or a Wednesday, they're all staying home with my wife, right? That's how that works. But my wife is a teacher as well. So whenever Calvin, one of my boys, got sick on a Thursday a couple weeks ago, guess who's staying home with him? It's not her. It's me. I'm writing my sermon from home that week. So I think that's the biggest thing is to have that understanding that you have a couple times a week where you are exceedingly unflexible. And the trade-off is you have a lot of other times during the week where you are a lot more flexible. And where a lot of jobs have a moderate amount of flexibility throughout it, ours is kind of like a swing on the polar opposites sometimes.
Yeah, I would just also encourage you that like you're in a season right now, 4, 5, 3, and 1. They're going to get sick a lot, especially if they're in school and preschool and stuff. They're just going to pass it on around. Because I mean, especially like even the 1-year-old and maybe a little bit the 3-year-old, they're still putting stuff in their mouth. They're sharing things. They're like playing with toys. So like it's just going to happen more often. And I would not get yourself all bent out of shape about your kids missing church a little bit for a season. If you're faithful parents, if that's part of your life, and if you're ministry parents, that's part of what it is. I wouldn't let yourself slide into guilt and like they're missing church, and church attendance is not going to be the thing that they look back on as like the generational gift you gave them. It's going to be your faith being passed on. Church attendance is important, but it's not the end all be all. And the Puritans talked about being providentially hindered, and how it's sometimes there's things that keep you from the gathering that like you really can't control, and this is one of them. Your primary role right now is to be a caregiver for your kids. And so if they miss children's church, even if they miss children's church a lot during a certain, season of life, it's going to be okay in the long term. Play the long game. And having said that, it stinks and it's hard. And we've dealt with this in the last couple of weeks. Our oldest 9-year-old is old enough now that she can stay at home.
Which is across the parking lot.
We live in a parking lot. Yeah, we live in the parsonage. So that's a different situation. If we had to drive across town, that wouldn't be the case. But so that's one way we deal with it. Also, like there might be some people in your church who are willing to like sit in the house with your kids, even if they're a little sick, if you have good relationships. So, I would caution you against like laying that burden on people. But if you have a good relationship with people in your church who love your kids, which hopefully you do, there might be some leeway there to be a little bit flexible, like especially with the older ones in the next few years. 4 or 5-year-old, 6, 7-year-olds, they can stay in their room for a couple hours while somebody sits in the living room with them.
It's a season. Like as your kids get older, things will shift a little bit. For me, my preteens and my teenagers, there are some Sundays where they're like, "Hey, we know mom can't make it to church tomorrow because the younger one's sick. Can we just come with you, Dad? We're serving in nursery, whatever it is." So if they are willing to wake up, the 5 a.m. or whatever the alarm clock goes off, the invitation is always open for any kid who wants to come with me. Just know that you're going to church early and you're going to have to sit there for a few extra things. So every now and then I'll have a kid take me up on that.
Whereas
if they know they can't.
7 years ago, that meant, if you had a kid with you, that meant that you were full-time caretaking.
Which would have happened. It would have happened. As they get older and they can take care of themselves at the church for a couple hours early, they just come with me if they don't want to miss church.
I'll have kids who are like, "Hey," or "Dad, I'm not feeling well. This has happened. This is a fairly new phenomenon for us. Dad, I'm not feeling well. Can I watch service in your office?" And so they'll go pull up YouTube and be in the office, and they're old enough now. So again, the older ones can be left at home. They're in middle school, they're teenagers, or we can have some in my office. But it's also like this is a season, yes, but it's also what you signed up for. Right. And I hate that you did not have another clergy spouse put their arm around you at the beginning of your marriage or at the beginning of your spouse's call and say, hey, this looks a little bit different than other families might look for this season, but it's worth it. And the trade-off really is better, but it kind of sucks on Sunday morning sometimes.
Sure. I really hope your church isn't putting this like undue pressure both on this wife and this family of like, hey, you better, like I've heard churches do this where they go to the youth pastors like, we haven't seen your wife in a while. We haven't seen your family in a while. And man, like that's just like
if someone was like genuinely like concerned, like, hey, are they okay? That's one thing. But if it's
yeah.
But if you're like, hey, one can get sick and we're gone for a month. like it's a domino effect or something like that. Like hopefully your church is being reasonable on all this. Let's dive into the next question. It's also from Reddit. The title is, on average, how many hours a week are you actually working? And so he wrote, my previous call, I was easily doing 55 plus hours a week. It was pretty bad. My wife even talked to me one night and said I was making her a single mother and not seeing the kids as much.
Yikes. Never want to have that conversation.
I cut it back down to 40 hours pretty radically after that conversation. It was good for all of us, but the church accused me of not working 40 hours a week after that. Ironically, do any of you actually work around 40 hours a week, or are you mostly pulling into the 50 plus range?
All right. If your church is wanting you to work a certain amount of hours per week,
that's a red flag.
I got questions. Yeah, that's a red. Like, we're not in the trading hours for dollars line of work. We're in a knowledge-based, skill experience-based leadership role. So some weeks I might work way more than 40 hours because I visited 4 people in the hospital and somebody called me and their spouse is leaving them, or like whatever, situations are crazy. I mean, you guys know this. There can easily be weeks where you have like 2 days in a row of 3 or 4 hour long conversations with people that are in crisis. And then there's times like in the summertime here, there's times where it's like, all I did was write a sermon and like nobody needed anything that week. Everybody's happy. And the summertime is a little bit less. So I mean, I think that it's seasonal. We've said this before. Like I'm about to get into a real busy season. Basically from now until like the beginning of June is very busy for me because of kids sports, my coaching, and then church and Easter and all that stuff. So you just have to know though, by the middle of the summer, kind of the dog days of summer, that's going to slow down quite a bit. And so, I think you'd want to more have a conversation with, if your church is asking you about not working 40 hours a week, I would want to maybe gently have a conversation about what's the expectations of my role. What is, if you have a job description, great. Now, if in that job description, when they hired you, it said, we want you to be in the office 40 hours a week, then, I mean, you should have seen that. But if it said, prepare sermons, lead things, the longer you are doing something, the more efficient you can be at it. So like, it takes me less time now to write a sermon than it did when I first started preaching every week. So, I mean, I don't think they're not paying me to spend hours doing something. They're paying me for the expertise and leadership skills that I've developed over these years. And so, it's okay if some weeks it's 45, 48 hours and some weeks it's like 38. Over the course of a year, it's going to definitely average out to more than 40 hours a week for me. But, like during COVID in a small church, I was doing all the yard maintenance. I was like mowing the entire property and like weed whacking and but I didn't have much else to do because we weren't meeting. So I think there should be a lot more flexibility. And I would hope that the leadership of your church realizes that what they are actually paying you to do is they're paying you for your time and expertise so you don't have to have another income.
Yeah, I'm with you on this, Jeff. Ministry comes and goes in seasons. It is so difficult to pinpoint. This is my weekly schedule every single week. I try to have a rhythm for sure, for sermon prep and sermon writing, but outside of that, things change. Meetings happen, crises happen. I had a full-time employee recently send me their schedule for like 3 months, and it was like detailed to the hour. And I just like it was a great effort, but I just gently reminded them that, man, I would say this is good for this week, but just know this might change next week, because being in full-time vocational ministry, you just don't you're not able to predict what's going to pop up and what you're going to need to be at. We have a general rule of thumb at Lakeview. This comes from the school of Doug Fields. We ask none of our employees be out more than 3 nights a week. So to limit ministry activities to 3 nights a week or less, that way your family does get you the bulk of the week when it comes to nighttime activities.
Gosh, and even 3 nights a week now, like at this stage of life, feels like a lot.
I'm talking
Pastor Andrew heard this and thought, that's crazy. I need to be at a ball game.
Right.
But now it's like 3 nights. If someone was like, Andrew, we need you to be out of the house 3 nights a week, I'd be like, ooh, I don't know.
Well, for example, my youth pastor, he does a high school Bible study on Sunday night. He plays church softball on Tuesday night, which I count as a night out because that's time where he's not with his wife. And then he has youth group on Wednesday night. So he knows for the next few weeks, those are his 3 nights out. And so I've asked him not to take any more nights out per week. And if you do, then to take something else off.
He's then not expected to be in like the next morning early, right?
We don't have office hours, so he's able to have freedom of schedule when it comes to that kind of stuff. But also, I'm reading this again, and if this is the way your spouse is feeling, you need to address this right now. Like this has to be an immediate conversation with your spouse, with your elders, with your leadership team, because your marriage is priority number 1 right now.
If the church is feeling frustrated at you and your wife is feeling frustrated at you, the church can be frustrated.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yes.
If you pull the plug and leave the church, in 6 weeks, a committee will be formed, and in 3 months, they'll have a dozen resumes.
Right.
If you lose your family, it's, a decade, and maybe you're watching somebody else walk your baby girl down the aisle.
Ouch.
Don't
Bro,
even.
You just said it.
But
that hurt.
But that's
Bro doesn't even have girls.
Bro doesn't have a girl.
Yeah, you got me on that one, dude.
Shut your mouth, bro. I got 2 of them. You be quiet. You don't know. All right.
I thought you were talking about the poster, and I was like, oh no, did I mess something up? But
no, you.
But no, this is.
Hey,
there's a whole lot at stake.
Yeah,
and a whole lot less at church than you think is at stake.
Wow.
And if you are trying to find 40 hours of things in your slow season, you're just burning yourself out. You are sitting at the church burning yourself out. And I would just gently remind you to remind these people in the church accusing you, you're on call 24/7 as well. Okay. Yeah. So you want to talk about, I'm not putting in the hours. I'm on call at 3 a.m. when so-and-so from the church, his son got drunk and hit a light pole downtown. And now I got to go down. Like, you're on call for that. So, and then also it's what Jeff said too. It's to be able to call an audible. Like that's part of what you do. Yesterday in our church, in our worship service, this has not happened, but at the end of service, we lost full control of our audio. Like we could not get anything on. And the whole worship team is they're like, what do we do? What do we do? Our Dan, the pastor, he was out, so I'm kind of the pastor up on deck, right? So I said, all right, listen, everybody knows the doxology. Go on stage. We're going to end this old school. And you know what? We went up there and we kind of talked through it. We did the doxology and we did some announcements, and actually it landed. But here's the thing. That's what you're paid to be there for, to be able to navigate small crisis, big crisis. It's not for how many hours you're giving. It's very, I learned this in the secular world with my father. So let me kind of translate this a little bit. My dad cut grass for a living growing up. When we first started, he had these lawnmowers. I don't know if you remember them. They're called MTDs, belly deck, slow, just personal lawnmower. It would take us an hour and a half to cut a yard. He'd make $55. Then he went and bought a better lawnmower, faster lawnmower. He could cut a lot more. We cut the same yard in 45 minutes. Guess what he made? The same money. Because his skill set, his ability, everything increased. And a couple of his customers were like, you're not here near as long as you used to be. He goes, but your yard looks better. Yeah. So why are you complaining? So it's not just in the pastor world. This is everywhere.
Well, but that there are, let's just talk preaching. There are some texts that you'll open your commentary, you'll open your scripture, and that sermon will write itself in 3 or 4 hours. You're like, oh, like that was work? Yeah. Cool. Yeah. That felt like I was doing my devos and the whole thing was done. And I had 3 points in a poem. Now, I don't do 3 points, but you know what I'm saying? Like, there are some sermons that you look down oh, that thing wrote itself. That
and then
was
you open
great.
up the text and it says, pay your pastor well. And it's really awkward. And
then
you're like, this is going to take hours to navigate.
And then you have some sermons that legitimately take 17, 18 hours to write.
Yeah.
That's true.
And your paycheck is the same for both weeks.
Right.
So you're like everybody has said, we are not in the business of trading time for money.
I'm also wondering, how are you doing with your days off? Are you in any kind of sabbatic rhythm? I know at Lakeview, we encourage our staff, hey, you get the weekend off every 7 weeks. Make sure you're taking that and you're spending time with your family, your spouses, etc. So this needs to be a staff conversation as well. We tried to build this into our staff meetings. We ask about spiritual health. We ask about your physical health. Are you taking your time, or are you spending that time you need with your family? So hopefully, as a pastor, you're pouring into your staff in this area too, and encouraging them to actively be present for your family. And if that needs to be a conversation with leadership, then have that conversation. I think they're going to respect that. It might be difficult at first, but I think they will respect that.
I do wonder if you were to, like, you posted this on Reddit. We need to do a better job of reminding people. We have a Facebook group called Practically Pastoring. Just find it. And there, maybe there are things that you are doing in your schedule that are taking too long that someone else has already figured out a more efficient way.
Like counting
and
people.
Ouch.
Yeah, but Jeff, nobody else knows if my kid is in the office watching on YouTube. And then I'm like, well, that counts as an online viewer and he's in person here on campus.
1.5.
So
double count.
So sometimes I got to get that counting in.
Nice. I see.
So, I mean, yeah, like this, like what you're doing is exactly what you should be doing. It's like, hey, okay, it takes me 3 hours to do my receipts. Well, there has to be a more efficient way than to take 3 hours each week. Or, if you're a youth
how much
pastor,
money are you spending? 3 hours a week?
Bro, Frank knows how to use the church card.
Dang.
Yeah, I know he's the church card.
Frank's paying for lunch today.
Yeah. There might be something in your ministry that can be expedited. Like maybe it's taken you, I don't know, I didn't tell what role this person was, if he was a youth pastor, a lead pastor, what he was doing. But I would say if you're like a lead pastor, there's a book called 8 Hours or Less. Maybe you're spending 35 hours on writing sermons each week, and that is eating up so much of your week that's why you're pushing another 20 hours in pastor visits. That's Rivian right there. There's a lot of things you could do to probably expedite your stuff, but as people have said, man, your family's a priority. I love the quote from Andrew. If your wife is going to get angry, and if your church is going to get angry,
that was Jeff.
Oh, let the church be angry. Like so be it. Sorry. But anyways, yeah. I would even like try to whoever these people are at your church who are like questioning your hours. I would even like kind of explain to them like, hey, this is what my 40 hours look. This is what my time looks like. But man, like, try to cut that culture out.
I do want to speak from experience here, because we had a season where it was very, very difficult at Lakeview, and we had some leadership in place that I don't know was all that healthy, and they did go down this road. We actually had to install certain apps on our phones and log every hour. And they asked us to turn on location services so they could track where we were. It was very unhealthy. It was probably
red flags.
It was probably the unhealthiest season of ministry I've ever been a part of, and I had to have some very, very difficult conversations with my leadership team. I did let the staff know that I was going to go to bat for them, because all of us as a staff were like freaked out. Like, this is the weirdest thing. We did have difficult conversations. There were certain elders that ended up resigning after the fact. So I don't know if it's going down that road, but be very, very careful, because it could get to that point.
But here's the thing. When Tim's talking about this, I think back to a season at the first church I served at, where that season at Lakeview happened right after a pastoral failure. The season where
it was a mess.
We had to fill out bubble charts and
I've had to do it at 2 different churches.
Yeah, we just the time tracking and the where are you, that happened right after.
Where are you?
Yeah. Yes, it was about that same era. But right after a pastor failed, and then it was like after the pastor failed, there was too much rope, and he hung himself with it. And so then the elders were like, oh, let's suck up as much control as possible and go from being kind of hands off to way too hands on. Sometimes you are in a season where the church leadership is responding, and unfortunately, not many of our elders have taken ecclesiology classes.
Or maybe they're reacting.
Yeah, exactly. It is a reaction to what has happened in the church.
Pendulum swing.
Yes. And so chances are it's for a season and it won't last. So if you're like, ooh, I don't know how long I can I can deal with this. Chances are you just need to outlast those elders. But it also might be time to pull the plug and say, do you know what? It's for the sake of my family, this isn't healthy and it's time to go.
This is so good. Hope this episode was beneficial for the people who've asked the questions. Hopefully it's been beneficial for you who are listening. I want to remind you of a Facebook group. That group is a great place to share ideas, to ask questions. And if you have a question that you want on this podcast, you want us to answer, go to the Facebook group, write a question, and if you post anonymously, it gets our attention. But it doesn't have to be anonymous. I keep saying that. If you have a good question that makes sense, or even just post, I would love this question to be answered on the podcast. It'll get our attention. We would love to answer on the question on the podcast. With that being said, we'll see you next week. I'm Frank Gill.
I'm Jeff Simpson.
I'm Delmar Pete.
I'm Andrew Larson.
And I'm Timothy Miller.
This is Practically Pastoring. See you next time. Bye.